If your sim looks like this in VR and you're hoping to fix this mess by focusing on the in-game graphics tab, I've got bad news for you. That's not where VR gets fixed. Most of your stutters and poor FPS performance, it doesn't rely solely on the in-game graphics. Yes, it's a factor, but there's way more to it than that. Now, if you want to learn how to get the smoothest performance that is possible with your rig, then you need to join me as we explore the most overlooked settings for VR in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. This is going to be part 1 of our series, and we're starting with the Quest 3 and Virtual Desktop because chances are that's what you're using too. And it is where a lot of hidden issues actually begin. But don't worry, even if you're using a different headset, most of what we will cover will still apply. Now stick around to the end of this video and I'm going to walk you through what else is coming up in the rest of the series. So let's dive right in. Now the first thing that you need to do is make sure that you've installed the correct virtual desktop, which you can buy or should buy from the MetaQuest store on your headset. That's important. Has to be the official version, not some PC app from Steam or whatever they have out there. So once you've got that downloaded and installed, you want to link your account to your Meta account, and then we're going to head over to the virtual desktop streamer, which is the app on the PC side first. So we're focusing on the options tab, and at the very top of the list is the preferred codec, and you want to use AV1 10-bit, which is designed for Quest 3 or better. That's the one I selected. And you need to make sure that your internet is set up correctly. If it's not and you're suffering, you may want to drop back to the HEVC or the H.264 plus. But hopefully, if you follow my guide on the internet and router setup, you should be able to use the AV1. Definitely, we also want to select adaptive quantization. Always have problems pronouncing that word, but you can see what it says. It does. It reduces compression artifacts in dark scenes, so definitely want to use that. To pass encoding, we leave that unselected. OpenXR runtime, VDXR, we want to select that for sure. Audio streaming, you can see what I have selected here. These are pretty standard. Allow remote connections, that's to connect to your computer, you need that on. Automatically adjust bitrate, I leave that off, and I think if you are suffering with your internet connection, you may want to put that on so it can scale back if needed. But if your internet is tip-top, I would leave that off to get the highest bitrate possible. At least that's what I do, and it works well for me. Then some of these other options are going to be your personal choice, like whether you want to start with Windows and whatnot. Lock computer and disconnect, I'd leave that one unchecked for sure. And then the other two are basically up to you. Alright, let's move over now to the headset side. And this is the menu that you'll get in the headset itself. Now I'm just touching briefly on this settings tab just so that you don't get confused with the streamer tab. But this settings tab is really more to do with the environment and the desktop itself, the virtual desktop, so it's not going to affect the gameplay and the performance. However, here in the streaming tab, this is where we have to ensure that we have things set up correctly. So first up, VR graphics quality. This is pretty self-explanatory. Just set it to whatever is the closest match to your GPU. Then below we have the VR frame rate. So you definitely want to set the frame rate to 90 FPS. That's what we're targeting for output. And we're going to match that with 45 frames per second frame lock using the NVIDIA control panel. This is what we call half refresh rate frame locking. It works by letting the sim render at 45 real frames per second, while frame generation fills in the rest, giving you a smooth 90 frames per second stream to the headset. Most mid to high end rigs can easily keep up with this. It really is the sweet spot for Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 in VR. Now, if you are running an older GPU or your rig is struggling a bit, we can scale that back to 3672. So the NVIDIA control panel will be locking to 36 frames, and then in the headset we'll do 72. But I would say start with the 9045 setup first, see if that works, and if it does, great, that's the sweet spot. Next up is the bitrate. I have mine set to 200 megabits per second. That gives me the best image quality without stutters. But that only works if your Wi-Fi is strong and stable, which we'll talk about in part 2 of this series. But if you are getting buffering or micro stutters, drop it to around 150 and see if that helps. Then we look at the sharpness tab. So I would suggest that you start somewhere in the middle. And we need to remember that sharpness also shows up later on in the OpenXR toolkit and in the Microsoft Flight Simulator settings. So you don't want to stack up on the sharpness in multiple places. That can lead to shimmering, edge artifacts, and unnecessary GPU load, right? So it's good to tweak one layer at a time, and we'll build it properly as the series progresses. But for now, let's keep that in the mid-range. I have mine set to 40%. All right, so let's move on. Gamma, I just leave that at 1. It really just affects the brightness. You can mess with it if you want, but it's more for visual preference, so that can stay at 1. Next up, very important, synchronous space warp. So set SSW to always enabled. This is what handles the frame generation. It creates a smooth 90 frames per second output by generating one synthetic frame between every real one when we're locked at 45 frames per second. So this is going to be essential for fluid motion in VR, especially with sims like Microsoft Flight Simulator. So here's another one that's kind of tricky. Snapdragon. This setting upscales the image to increase detail. So I leave it on here, but you need to bear in mind that there are other sections in the overall settings, like in the OpenXR toolkit and again in the Microsoft Flight Simulator in-game settings, which deals with upscaling. So if we keep layering upscaling one on top of the other, we may end up with something that has put too much load on your GPU and possibly even cause over sharpening, and then we need to come and scale back on some of those. But generally I leave this on. Video buffering, pretty simple. This helps to reduce minor stutters or frame skips. I recommend keeping it on. Center to play area. Some of these things are going to be personal choices. This recenters your VR view to your current stage area. It really doesn't affect the simulator directly, but it can help if your view feels misaligned. I think I have this off usually. Next up, track controllers. Really, it's not needed for the sim. Some people leave it off. I do have it on because the extra data processing really isn't significant, and I use my controllers in VR, so I leave it on. Forward tracking data to PC, also not used, so turning it off just keeps things clean. And here we have some more optional stuff like increased color vibrance. So this can boost colors in VR, but it can also make things look unnatural. So I would suggest test this on your own rig, put it on, put it off, see which looks better to your eye, and then use that option. Increase video nominal range. There's another optional one. However, I've found that the sim already looks very washed out in VR, at least in the Quest 3. And this has been known, to expand brightness, and I find it's already like the whites are blown out already. Yeah, so I would leave this off. Show performance overlay. This is just, I like to actually leave it on because it kind of helps me to do a sanity check to see, well, you know, is everything set up correctly? Am I getting the FPS that I'm supposed to be getting? And then it's just to press the two thumbstick buttons to turn it off and bring it back on again. So again, this is another personal choice. So if you followed these steps, you might already notice a difference, but we're far from done. Coming up in this series, we're going to touch on the NVIDIA control panel, DLSS upgrade with the swapper. We're going to do a deep dive into the OpenXR toolkit. We'll also cover proper Wi-Fi setup. Then we're going to touch on RAM and BIOS tweaks, as well as Windows optimization. Then finally, the in-game settings, once your system is ready for them. And when we've gotten through all of that, we've got a special treat for you, which is some bonus footage you definitely don't want to miss. So that's going to wrap things up for part 1 of this series. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you will be notified as soon as part 2 is up. The on-screen link to part 2 will be right there as soon as it's uploaded. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.